In the previous episode of this game review, we looked at Elemental Maze by Casper the Pancake. This is a game where you travel a maze and you try to avoid damage while gaining points. Today we're going to be looking at a maze game by Funky Monkey 4303 to get an idea of other practices for making a maze game. Right off the bat you can see there are a few sprites. When we start the game, the movement looks nice and it uses the pen module to track your movement, an interesting concept.
For a few moments later.
And when we finish the maze, we go to the next maze. Pretty nice. There's no code over here for the backdrops except for this thing for initializing the backdrop and a comment that he's going to add more mazes. There's a lot of costumes over here. So now we just have to look at the sprite 1 to see how we manage everything. At a glance, this is incredible. There's only 3 modules in this whole thing. Let's zoom in and take a look at the movement. This first module sets up variables for collision, and over here you have the initialization, the movement, very simple movement, and this very simple logic for collision. If we're touching the walls, then you go to the previous variables where you weren't touching the walls. Then when you touch the gold color, you go to the next level and erase all of the pen markings you made for drawing your maze. I'm going to be looking at all of the different sprites and what they do. And now we're going to take a look at some notes about this game that I've just reviewed. All of the single job sprites were easy to document, and as you saw in the previous video, most of the work is being done by the coin sprite and the player sprite. This game has a lot of features for a maze game. And in this maze game, the player will control movement, damage, he takes care of broadcasting and a lot of variable management. The player character manages his own health and points, including the cloud variable for world record. Now time to add in what my takeaways from the game are. And part of the cuts in this next session, but we're just going to document real quickly what I liked and what I might do differently. For the player character, I think that the movement is smooth. I would simplify the movement script. I like the damage concept, but I mentioned before I would put the player in more direct danger if we're going to be focusing on health, points, and survival. I would try to run the game with fewer variables, but I don't think I'm going to tackle that in the scope of what I'm going to create next. The cloud variable was also interesting, but I don't think I'm going to use that just yet either. There was also a pretty neat sound mechanic on picking up of the coins and hearts, as well as a variety of music. Probably the most interesting mechanic of this maze though is this damage and survival mechanic, where you're making the maze instead of something where you explore, something that you have to survive. I liked the title animation and also the animation for the +1 or -1 damage. I'm going to borrow that for another script. The settings page was interesting. I think I'm going to try to build a different version of that. This concludes the review portion, and now time to make my own. I'm going to try building this one at regular speed with you guys so you give me some feedback on how this goes. First step is to upload my own map from a vector editor and clean it up. I got this map from Google Images when I just looked up vector maze. I'm using the selection tool to highlight and remove the 2 obstructions over here, a green and a red dot. And then after that I delete ScratchCAD and draw my own player sprite. If you notice on the bottom left, it says convert to bitmap. That means that I am using vector mode. I'm using the square tool and I zoom in so I can draw a small square that's going to fit through this tiny maze up in the upper right hand corner. Here I'm squinting at the upper right, and I'm going to maximize the screen to find my player sprite, and it is tiny. I need to resize this thing immediately. The good thing with vector sprites is that once you make them, you can always resize them. Now I can see my sprite in the maze, but I probably won't be able to move through anything. We make these changes little by little to make the workable player sprite. And I can't arrange the sprite in the stage, but I can do it on the project editor. Here I am going to add some code for the player character. When I start the game by clicking the green flag, I'm going to use a conditional statement over here. If I'm not touching the color of the wall, I'm going to grab the wall color with the dropper right here. The black color is located at 0, 0, 0. And here I'm going to take the movement script we looked at earlier from FunkyMonkey 4303, but I'm going to sub in WASD for the arrow keys, and I'm going to do similarly changing the X when we press the different keys. I'm using the process of duplicating a script so that I can quickly rebuild with different logical steps. When I press different keys, I want to move in different directions. As a summary for this, if I want to go left, I press letter A and it changes the X by -2, which is left on the directional plane. I'm going to add in one more control called forever so that this is always going to be applicable. And I can move, but I immediately got stuck. So I can only move when I'm not touching the walls, and I need to create some variables to mimic what I learned from FunkyMonkey. I named these variables not stuck X and not stuck Y, so you can see that these are variables to take care of tracking when the player sprite is not stuck inside of a wall. So I need to initialize these variables, and then I need to set up a loop so that I can maintain when the player is not stuck in the wall. Basically means that if I'm not touching the walls, then I can move, but if I get stuck in the walls, then I need to do something about it. Over here, I realize I have no conditional statements to execute when I am touching the wall. I need a if-then-else. So I'm going to go ahead and grab an if-then-else statement over here. Not touching the wall, then do all of the movements. Otherwise, change my position to the time when I wasn't stuck. Now I set up my variables for when I'm not stuck. And time to take this baby out for a spin. But there I am already stuck in the wall, so I need to exit from this and fix that. In this view over here, I can move my player sprite so it's not stuck in the wall anymore, but as you can see, it's a little bit difficult to manipulate. And I still get stuck. Back to the drawing board for this guy. I think I'm just going to go use a tiny circle for the purpose of testing out my collision. Center it on the paint editor on the crosshair. Now let's retest the code with a smaller sprite. And I still got stuck. I'm going to have to debug this guy, so be right back.
2,000 years later.
And after I paused, I forgot to start recording again until just right now, and I've done a lot in the meantime. Let's take a look at it. To take a quick look, I have a custom block for the movement and the modifier. When I click start, the enemy starts in the top left corner, and he will move to random spots in the screen, always looking at the player, and when he announces different states of the game, your movement changes. When he says red light, you slow down. When he says yellow light or green light, your movement is modified less. And I made the enemy move randomly because I wanted to make an example that when you make a random movement, it's not as threatening as a directed at the player movement. You also notice I cut out a lot of holes from the maze to make it less difficult to navigate. So now I want to walk you guys through the code a little bit. When I start off the game, I initialize the variables for how fast you move. I made a little ball to move through the maze, and I'm always setting up this code I borrowed from the Funky Monkey 4303 to set up a position when I wasn't stuck, and I added in variables for left and right speed and up and down speed called XV and YV. I have a custom block to organize my movement, and it's using similar logic to what I had before, if then else statement, except this time it just sets up the left or right speed to be positive or negative in the up or down and left and right directions. Modifier over here operates over the game state, which is a global variable that the enemy decides randomly. If he says green light, you're going to slow down by a little bit, yellow light, you're going to slow down by a medium bit, and red light, you're going to slow down a lot. After the modifier is applied, then you change the left and right position and the up and down position by the speed of those variables. When I go into the edit menu over here, you can see that this custom block is running without refresh, meaning that it is going very fast to process my orders. Let's take a look at the background that I have over here, and it has one script to switch to the game state, which is right here, named after the backdrop costumes: green light, yellow light, and red light. I used pastel kind of colors over here because the primary colors were too intense and it was difficult to see the player character. Then when we look at our enemy, when I pulled out a Kirby from my backpack, I have him so that he's always going to be animating through his walking phases. I cut the animations for this guy on another video, and we'll check that out another time. Kirby's code, he's always going to be walking by changing his costume every 0.1 second, and also he's going to initialize the game state, meaning that the maze is going to start off blank, and it's going to pick randomly 1 to 3 chance to set the state to green light. And when Kirby sets the state, he's also going to say it out loud so that he seems kind of ominous, right? My first instinct with Kirby was to make him chase the player directly, but when I did that, it was too hard to survive in the puzzle right away, so I changed it over to random movement. So my main takeaway from the elemental maze is that I like the concept of a survival maze, and I would like to iterate upon that, but it's a little bit difficult to manage all the settings right now, but we'll cover that in upcoming videos. If you would like for me to review your game in an upcoming video, leave a link for it in the comments. Thanks for watching.